So I started by adding a mid-tone. I've now added some highlight colours. So now let's go a little bit darker. I've cleaned my brush out. I'm going to leave this patch of lighter browns here because I may be able to make use of those later. So this time I'm starting with some of the alizarin. We'll put a little bit of the yellow in. Then we'll grab a bit of the blue. A bit more of the red and the yellow. Just a touch of the blue. A bit more yellow. A bit more of the yellow. And it's not quite what I was after, but we'll see how that looks on the painting. So again, keep the paint surface wet. You know, you don't want it soaked, but definitely you don't want it drying out either. And then I can again blend this colour in. Using the same approach that I did for the highlights, just looking at the big shapes. And really, you know, a lot of representational drawing and painting is training yourself to be able to mimic patches or shapes of tone and colour, and then being able to place those on the paper in the appropriate position and orientation relative to one another. And if you can think of it that way, rather than I'm trying to draw a house, or I'm trying to draw a chicken, or I'm trying to draw a person, if you can detach, you know, when you think about what you're doing, if you can sort of completely detach from what you are drawing and just think of it as a set of shapes, you know, and there's perhaps a pattern there sometimes. Other times it's just, you know, apparently random, but you just have to look at that shape there in relation to that shape, in relation to that shape. It helps to simplify the process and helps you sort of see past all the complexity of your subject. Okay, so now let's try and go darker again. So this time I'm going to start with some of the blue. We'll take a little bit of the crimson. A little bit more. Touch of the yellow. A bit more of the red. And that's a nice dark, it's almost well, it's a purple really, rather than a dark brown. But again, we'll see what that looks like on the painting. So I'm sticking with the same brush. And that's not quite right for the deep shadow colour, but I quite like the way it looks on the painting in comparison to the other colours. And I think I want to use this fairly sparingly because there isn't too much super dark going on, but there is a little bit back here, so we can add a little bit in. And also up here as well. And perhaps even just a touch on the back of the neck, just very gently apply a little bit of this colour, a bit there too. Could perhaps even make that bit a little bit darker. It's funny that the more you look at the reference, the more colours you see. And so I have to kind of keep just reminding myself to stick to the big shapes, because you could, it's almost like you know, a fractal pattern where you kind of, the more you zoom in on it, the more you see, and the more intricate the pattern becomes. So that's probably enough on the main body for now, but what I'm actually going to do is, again, it's not quite the right color, but for the head, there's quite a lot of white on the head up here, but just to make that stand out when I do put it in a moment, I'm just going to use this darker color just to fill in part of the head. And then what I'm going to do next is actually come in with a smaller brush, begin to describe the head and the legs in a bit more detail. So I've switched to a little filbert brush, and I've mixed up a mixture of the crimson, some white, and just a touch of the yellow, just to give me a pale red. And what I'm doing at the moment is just looking carefully at the line of the back of the head. So there's a little gap that I've missed there, which I need to fill in, and my drawing at this point was a little bit out, I think. So I'm just going to correct that by beginning to describe the red. I don't know what the technical term is for these bits on top of a hen's head, but you've got this sort of red Mohican. So again, at this stage, I don't have to describe it absolutely perfectly, but I just want to get the essence of the shape in place. And then, yeah, that colour is probably a bit too dark, but regardless of that, the colour becomes quite a bit lighter as we go down towards the beak. So I've just added a bit more white for that reason. And then let's just add a little more water so that as I add this lighter colour, it blends a little into the darker colour that I put down. And then what we can begin to do is look at other areas on the head and see where there are bits of pink. So again, even though I'm using a smaller brush, and even though I'm looking at the head, for the moment, I'm just trying to consider the situation as patches of colour in much the same way that I did the body. Now, the sort of pink frill, which is back in behind here, is quite a bit darker. So what I'm going to do is just grab a little bit of that very dark colour on my palette that I used earlier, mix it in with what I've got on the brush already. And even if the colour isn't quite right, it'll hopefully be quite a bit darker, which it is. So that'll just help to push that back behind the lighter colour we've got here. And then what I've done is I've gone back to the pale pink colour that I had on my brush, but I've added a lot more white to that colour. And I could almost do with quite a bit more white, I now realise. And what I'm going to do now is just block in the legs and the feet. So what I'm doing here is I'm just trying to progress all parts of the painting equally before I go into, you know, a huge amount of detail. And again, I'm not, you know, getting overly concerned at this stage by, for example, the shape of the little claw on the end of the toe. We just want the general structure of the toes and the legs to be in place. So hopefully what we'll end up with is a hen, you know, gradually emerging from these patches of tone and colour. And then I'll be able to selectively pull into focus, you know, particular parts as I see fit. You know, obviously we'll see how it goes, but that's the plan. Now I'm struggling in my reference to see the third toe on this left-hand foot. I can't quite work out why that is. It must be just hidden, I think, beneath some twigs. So we'll leave that as it is for the moment. And then I'm just having a look to see if I can use that pale pink colour elsewhere. And I think I can use some of that up on the head here, just to lighten those patches of pink I had before. Now, you know, as you can see, I'm not drawing the eye at all at the moment. And again, we'll come to that later. But this colour's, you know, it's okay. It's not exactly right, but it's good enough to kind of get rid of some of the background. And, you know, fill in the silhouette of the beak.